Alright, so following on from the last video about the initial awakening, after this realization, I became very interested in immediate reality. I became very interested in what is immediately here, because I was present, or there was a presence here that transcended this self. And what was here became very interesting. So I remember Eckhart Tolle, I watched a video of him saying that when you appreciate a flower, he used, when you appreciate a flower, the flower doesn't have eyes. You give it eyes to appreciate itself. It appreciates itself through you. It's looking at itself through you, and that's a description of it's like vaguely framed in duality, like a non-dual, a transcendent non-dual reality. And that's a description of that. So that really hit me. I really noticed that in my experience. So I was looking at things, I was looking at the world, and it felt like this knowingness was recognised. What I had woken up to in this initial realisation, this knowingness, this ever-present, aware knowingness, I started to notice it in the seen world, because the awareness doesn't have limits, so it started to spill out from the illusion of this separate self into the sense fields. So I was looking at things, and it was clear that that was knowing itself. It was clear that this experience, this seeing, is me. Like, I can't describe it, it's going to be hard to describe, that everything in experience is this knowingness that I realised as the most fundamental essence of myself. So that started to spill out of this imagined separation. So it brought everything closer. It made everything feel more intimate and more alive, rather than an inert material world. It started to come to life, and I really enjoyed like observing that, you could say, in the visual sense. I will say this non-dual realization clarified for me mostly in the visual sense, but apparently the visual sense is the trickiest one, because the illusion of duality is more solid in that, rather than the senses and the hearing and the sensation. But this clarified for me initially in the visual sense. So then I noticed some strange things. I would just, my practice, let's say, would be just keeping attention, keeping awareness in the senses, and I found it easier and easier to do that. I started to notice that this knowingness, this awareness, is everywhere. Everything that's aware of itself, it doesn't know distance. Distance doesn't exist in the experience of knowingness. So I'm knowing that tree over there, it immediately knows itself. There's no distance there in the seeing. So this really bizarre curiosity came over, and I was looking at things and I was like, where am I aware of that, or where is the awareness of that? It started to not make sense a little bit, and I was aware of it here, but it was aware of itself over there. Me as the knowingness was knowing itself everywhere simultaneously at once. So then the idea of subject, object, distance, division stopped really making sense in the experience, because it's all structured in thought, a thought structure, an objective reality of me looking at that object over here as a separate subject. So as exploring this curiosity progressed, I started to notice that anything seen, there's only one seeing. Anything seen is one. There's one awareness, there's one seeing. So it all appears simultaneously. So the objects in this started to become really interesting, because I noticed that what the object seen is never separate. It can never be separate from the totality of the awareness, the totality of the seeing. I can never see an object separate from the totality of the scene. There's only one scene. So the division of objects stopped making sense as well, because an object could never present itself as truly separate in direct experience. It was always part of the totality. It was always one. When experiencing that is what I had realised in the initial shift, this infinitely self-aware, immediate knowingness of presence doesn't know separation. The awareness doesn't know separation. It's all simultaneous. So then I started like moving around and looking at objects and see if I could trick it and actually see it separate. So but it didn't work. So the borders started to merge together, and this is when I started to get the fear, because I was directly experiencing something that me as an objective mind, me as a person, cannot figure out. It stopped making sense, and when it stopped making sense, I got a fear the me got a fear because I wasn't in control. And it's very similar to the crazy mushroom trip, actually. So everything started to, right, if I describe this, people are going to imagine it and make a picture of it and imagine that's what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about that. Everything started to merge together in the scene. It was exactly the same as what I had been seeing as a person, but from that awareness, from that knowingness that I now felt as myself, if you could even say that, as the fundamental fabric of what this is, this silent, still knowingness. From that perspective, what was I talking about? It's gone now. Yeah, from that perspective, there's no distance, there's no division. So that really freaked me out, because it was like reality was closing in, or I was losing myself. So I got like quite strong fear responses, and quite strong random neurotic thoughts from this, as this duality in the senses was being seen through, or it's clarifying that it doesn't actually exist in immediate experience. So after this, I noticed something, or I'm going to say I noticed something, but it's not really like that. That made the whole construct just collapse completely. And that was when I looked back. So during all this inquiry or into the senses, or this looking, so the inquiry at that point was just looking, there was a sense that I was looking out at a world, that I was seeing this absence of division, this absence of distance. It didn't make sense from this center point of me. That was the problem. That was what was creating these fear responses, because there was still the assumption that me is a body here, and what was deconstructing out there in terms of distance and separation was a threat to me, this body, because I'm seeing it from a position. So I looked back. This seeing started to become clearer. There was more interest in this before, not just like a casual assumption that I know what this is and I'm not interested in it. I looked back and I noticed that I can't find me here. There's no limit to this seeing. It was like I had an imagined window, I say this all the time, that was here, that was just assumed. Because I see people, I see them separate, and I see they stop here. So I assumed what I am stopped here, but in the direct experience, in the looking, there's no limit to it. You can't find a stop point. You can't find the start point where I start as the subject here, and then the seen world, there's a gap there and it starts out there. So that me that was assumed here collapsed, and with that, what collapsed was the subject-object division, the separation of me here and world out there, an inside entity, inside and an outside world separate. Inside and outside didn't make sense anymore. It completely collapsed. So with that, I lost the real experience of distance, the real experience of there being separate objects out there, the real experience of me as a subject in here, separate from what I'm looking at. It all collapsed, and what it is in the absence of that, I can't describe to you, because you would have to interpret that description as a person, as a self. But what I'm pointing to now is your experience, your direct experience, and you can confirm this by looking, becoming interested in the looking, becoming interested in the me that's looking out from here. So as that collapsed, what also collapsed was the idea of separate sounds, of objects, distinct sounds out there. The idea of me as the one hearing here collapsed with that visual thing. So then sounds were hearing themselves, completely self-aware in immediacy with no separation. There weren't separate sounds anymore, there was just sound. There weren't separate objects, me and a world out there, there was just the scene. There weren't distinct sensations. So with this realization, there was something still holding, and it was something in the center point in the body. There was something in the body still resisting, and that's when I got these waves of existential fear from seeing truly an experience that I don't exist, but there was still some sort of emotional holding going on in the body. So after the initial realization, when I sat down, let's say to meditate, it would be a kind of constant level presence, peaceful, constant level awareness that was still, and there was some dynamic quality to sense experience. There was some dynamic quality to the space of mind and thought, but it was still. After I realised non-dual in the senses, when I sat down to meditate, it's like fucking absolute, completely mental, direct contact with the senses, so intense, so alive, so incredible. I can't describe it. As I sat down to meditate, there was just this of the senses of experience unified as direct sense without a filter, but there was still the assumption of me here experiencing that in some subtle way. So I felt like I couldn't handle it. So when I sat down to meditate, it was like the senses were too strong. There was absence of structure. So in that, the senses become more intense, and it was overwhelming. But I noticed it was overwhelming because there was this framework here in the body as the center point, in some subtle way experiencing these senses. So I turned my attention into that, and I noticed this is when the body disappeared. When I noticed that there was this framework of this like, if you know what proprioception is, there's a mind element to that, and it's the image, the map of your body when you assume you're here and you use it to function. So there was this kind of map of my body here, and it started to, the sensation that made that up, I focused on it in the body, in here, in where I felt this intense emotional blockage, and the framework started to become hollow. The sensation that is contained in my body, say for example my hand, it's contained by mind. The mind structures it so that it knows what it is. Focusing on the sensation doesn't have shape, it doesn't have limits. Like I said, the knowingness, the awareness, knows it immediately. It doesn't need a framework to understand it. So the senses bled out of the body became hollow, and then this crazy intense sense experience went right through the body, and with that then there was no separation between me and the experience. I wasn't experiencing anymore. The experience was me. The body dissolved into this impossible paradox, this incredible, mysterious, whatever this is, and it was just pure sense, without interpretation, without a me struggling in the middle, trying to make sense of it. And with that, there was a massive relaxation into the senses, and I can't describe to you the beauty and the peace and this incredible sense of like love and simplicity that comes from this even existing. And with that, I got this enormous sense of whoa, this enormous appreciation that's inherent in the senses, without interpretation, as itself. This, I guess maybe that's wrong, but there was a fascination and awe and appreciation for this that completely invalidated all of these positions, all of these desires, all of these aversions. It was complete within itself, without the need for anything. It was whole within itself. I was complete. I was whole. I am this. Absolutely incredible. So that was a non-dual. This is a non-dual realization, and after that, it kind of came in bits. It seemed like there were these insights that were distinct and had their own quality and there were their own parts, and it kind of continued like that for a while. And more assumptions deconstructed. Things became more simple. The senses became more vivid. Sorry, I've got a cold right now. Everything became more beautiful and simple. And in the Buddhist terms, they use luminosity. The senses became heightened. There was no longer me in the middle. So there was just the sense. And when there's just the seen, when there's just the heard, without this thing filtering it, it's incredible. I can't describe it. And with that realization, then there goes the apathy, there goes the boredom, there goes the constant desire for something else, the constant desire for a better experience, the constant resistance to what is, or aversion to what is. I noticed that this sense experience, it was so intense, that the creation of a self separate was like an attempt to get out of it, an attempt to avert from what this is. But that's not even possible. That's why it's so uncomfortable. So letting go of that position and dissolving into what already is a massive release. It's a great release, and with it comes this inherent love and fascination, this inherent feeling of interconnectedness and intimacy with anything in experience. Anything in your experience is inherently already this that you have realized yourself to be, that I realized myself to be, is this self-aware, transcendent of limitations, infinite knowingness. And it was now vividly clear in the senses. The knowingness is the scene. There's no knower separate from it. The knowingness is the sound. It knows itself. There's no need for this idea in time of a separate hearer for that to be. That's just a thought. So that again, it deconstructed these I call them augmentations, these thought-based assumptions of structure and position and dimension and separation. All of that in its reality completely collapsed. Everything became more immediate, more simple, and it doesn't want anything. There's no problem in it. It's inherently free of problems. Problems don't exist. Whatever is this, and that's what it is. So I noticed though that there was this kind of, right, this is, I'm going to really struggle to explain this, but I'm going to try and explain it. There was this subtle story that I felt on an emotional level. So I described this before. It felt like an emotional flavor memory. You know when you smell a smell or hear a song and it reminds you of a time in your life, but not the specifics, not what was happening, but this feeling. You feel it. Do you know, if anyone knows what I'm talking about, you hear a song and it reminds you, but you get this feeling as well of that time. Something about that time integrated into the feeling of what you are, like a memory. I noticed these, and they weren't like cognitive memories, they were just emotions. The memory didn't have any structure to it, but the kind of visceral emotion feeling, I thought it was non-distinct. Strange, very strange. So I started noticing these, and when I looked at something, I would get anything, I would get a different flavour of this kind of emotional memory. It had a narrative quality to it, a very subtle narrative quality to it. And then I started to notice that there was this tendency here of this having to be something, to know something, this having to be something to know itself, this fundamental position of there having to even be anything, there having to be something real, there having to be something not real, this tendency to make a position to relate to things at a very deep level, to know and understand things, to take a position on something, for something to relate to something, to know it. There was this tendency there, and it was like it's this fundamental viewpoint, this fundamental subtle narrative tendency, and it presented to me a lot in these emotional memories. I started to notice that tendency was there, and it was kind of like, I would describe it as the deepest level of separation, the deepest level of me. There having to be something here for this to be. There having to be a purpose or a narrative or a story, or a me or an observer or whatever. There having to be anything. And that's when this really hit me, because I was holding on to some deep level of me. I was holding on to this having to be real, having to have a purpose, and I really thought there was something here. I really deeply felt that there was something. There was a purpose. There was a me. There was a story. There was something to this. I really thought that. I really felt that. And when I saw that wasn't there, it was a real a real hit. Like it was like death. It was death. It was letting go of everything. It was letting go of the whole thing, the whole story of what I am, having to be something, having to be here, having to have a life. It was letting go of that whole thing, confronting death head on, and transcending that completely by letting it go. Yeah. When that fundamental position isn't here, all that is here, when that fundamental story of me being here, when experience becomes so immediate, so intense that that's lost, that doesn't need to be here. There doesn't have to be something here for this to be. There doesn't have to be a you here for this to be what it is. It becomes much more immediate. It becomes much more simple. It supports itself. It doesn't need to have a story. It supports itself. But within that, all stories appear, and that's completely okay. It doesn't have to have anything other than what it is. There's this subtle suggestion of there being a something else, or there being something here, and that's not what this is. This is just this. And to really let go into that, you have to let go of these deeply held attachments to life, my life as a person. You have to let go of that. You have to see through that, and in that you're confronting death, and you're letting go into what, let's see, what you are, transcendent of these attachments to a me, transcendent of the idea of there being something here called me that has to relate to things to exist, that has to have a life, that has to be born and die. You're letting go of all that and almost dying into what's here, which transcends life and death. And with that, you let go of your life. You let go of this position. You let go of having to be here, and with that, you let go of having to get out of it. You see through it completely. And the simplicity in that, the freedom in that, is that this is clear, that this is what this has always been. It's clear, there's finality to it. There's like a simplicity and a certainty to experience that transcends all stories about time, stories about my life. It transcends all that completely. It doesn't care about that. It transcends life and death. It transcends the story of that by falling into what's here that isn't subject to these dualities. And with that, there's a freedom from having to have a view, there's a tension in that, having to view things as an entity, having to understand things from a position. There's an uncertainty inherent in that, and a tension there, and it can be felt, and it's very deep, it's very automatic, it's very suggested. Like the way reality is that there's a point of view that is here in order to understand any of this, to relate to something in a very fundamental way. That doesn't have to be here. That doesn't have to exist. It doesn't exist. So then all concepts, all dualities, anything that you can think or take a position on, anything at all, it is invalidated by the immense paradox of direct experience, the immense paradox of experience without there having to be someone in the center to experience it, without there having to be like a constant awareness to support it all, or a constant background to make it exist as somehow separate from it. It's so paradoxical, you can't really talk about it. But then it becomes obvious when it clarifies. It becomes very obvious, and that it's like simplicity. It's like the letting go of there having to be something to understand. There having to be a spiritual path. There having to be a me as the one on this path, and discovering this. So the whole spiritual journey comes to an end. It's not relevant anymore, because that related to the person. That was the person's story. And with that, all other stories, all other patterns of relation disappear into this immediacy. And all of those, everything spontaneously, all of the stories and all of your life and the actions and the thoughts spontaneously appear as experience from nothing and disappear back into nothing as if they were never there. Everything is seen to be completely transient, completely appearing due to conditions, impossible to understand. And in that impossible to understand, then we let go of the need to understand, and we see that this what you are supports itself. It's like it's doing its own thing. Like the universe is moving you. In immediacy, you become, this becomes clear that all of this is spontaneous. All of this is supported by the infinite immediate conditions of the universe. So in a way, you could say you become the universe, and as that, it then becomes clear that none of this is separate in any way. There's no separate awareness. None of this is separate. It's so integrated, it's so interconnected that there isn't any separation. All works as you could say a singularity or a non-dual mystery. So in that there's this profound connection to everything that you can feel viscerally. You can feel it. All the senses, all the sensations, all the movements are the universe moving itself, spontaneously, mysteriously, and and in that there's just this immense letting go. There's this immense like finality, this immense simplicity that this is already the way it is. It's not another way. The way it is the way it is, and there's no me in here that can control that. There's no separate me in here that has to struggle with that from a separate position, from a point of view. It all just works itself spontaneously. And you could say all of it is what you are, but that would be a position as well. So anything you can say about it doesn't make sense because of the paradox. But the realization of that is profoundly clear. I got a bit emotional there talking about the death. It's still a bit raw. But basically what we're doing with this in the end is confronting that big question, that mystery of what is life, what is death. Confronting the reality that I will die. This illusion of a separate entity, this feeling of this me, will die. It's impermanent. You're going to die, so you're going to have to confront death. And we avoid it by going into these stories. But that's right here. That question, the feeling of I'm going to die, I don't know what life is, that uncertainty is right here. It's not solved somewhere else. It's right here. And in that is transcendent of life and death. Life and death are just concepts in this. They don't make sense. So what becomes more clear is this direct experience with nothing in it. They're not having to be a person here experiencing. They're not having to be a point of view. Just appearance, empty of inherent substance as something. Empty of a point of view of me here having to perceive it. Clearly that this is it. This is all there is. There isn't something else. There's no something else. There's no better this. This is it. This is the whole thing right now. And then you could ask yourself the question that, let's say, this is theoretical, right? Let's say if you realize this no self, then you won't be reborn. When you die, you won't be reborn as a self. You won't come back to this. That's permanently gone in the way that you felt it's real. And how does that make you feel? Is that frightening? That's what we confront, that feeling. But that's what we're looking at. Why is that there? Why is there this uncomfortable sense of I'm going to die, but that's not right? Somehow I know that's not right, that this ends. It's because that's an illusion. It doesn't make sense. The self that we were referring to that generates that fear when we ask these questions of non-existence or death, it's not right because what we're taking ourselves to be is an illusion. But that doesn't mean letting go of that. That doesn't mean that the death of that illusion isn't going to be intense, isn't going to be painful. Because we're undoing this strange illusion that we've really felt to be real for so long. And we're seeing right through that. We're letting go of that completely. And it can be an intense thing to do. But after this realization, it becomes, I can't describe it becomes too simple. More simple than simple, it becomes complete. It's like there's nothing to do, but there's doing. There's no one doing, there's no one, but the illusion of that appears. The illusion of this separate character appears in relational concepts and thought, and that's completely okay, because it's clear that that's all part of this. That all supports itself. That's just part of the appearance. It's an illusion. But then we can appreciate that in immediacy without it having to be real, without it having to be me. It's free. It's freed up to be what it is without that identification. There's a great release from all of the stories about me and the worries and the relating to things and so on, the reality of that collapses completely. Yet that will go on. The appearance of that will go on, but it's no longer felt to be real. But what it's made of, you could say, is the realest thing there is. The only real is what it's made of, and that becomes more clear, that becomes more beautiful. And it's only when I guess when we can appreciate the impermanence of this life and the things that we would become attached to, the people we love. It's only when we appreciate the impermanence of the illusion we create around that and attach to it and identify with it. It's only when we let go of that illusion is seen through, but what it's made of clarifies, what it actually is clarifies. The person you love, your family, the stories and the illusions around what that is as I relate to it collapses, and what becomes more clear and more beautiful is what they actually are. The immediacy as what you've realised, and that transcends those boundaries completely. It transcends the separation completely, and then you just fall in love with everything, because you're not scared of it. You're not like creating this position separate from it to try and understand it. You just stop doing that, and what this is so beautiful, is infinitely mysterious, fascinating, and that feeling of, whoa, this how can this be? How can this be? That limit of the mind becomes quite enjoyable, and then the awe never goes away. The beauty of whatever this is always here, is always going, and the mystery of it, you can get lost in it because it's so complete. It doesn't need to be understood from a separate position anymore, so we can let go of that and just let the experience be what it is inherently, and there's a great freedom in that. Anyway, I've talked for too long. Let me know your experiences, and I'll talk to you next time.